You bought the Honda Civic instead of the BMW. You did the responsible thing. You listened to all the personal finance advice, you ran the numbers, you made the smart choice. And 12 months later, you're sitting in your driveway wondering why you feel like you made a terrible mistake. Not because the car is bad, it's fine, it works perfectly, but because somehow, someway, this cheap car is costing you way more than you ever imagined. And I'm not just talking about money. Look, if you've ever convinced yourself to buy the practical option only to feel like you got the short end of the stick, this video is going to completely reframe how you think about value, cost, and what cheap actually means. My name is Rehan, and I spend way too much time thinking about why smart people make decisions that slowly drain their bank accounts. If you're someone who's tired of doing what you're supposed to do with money only to end up feeling broke and frustrated anyway, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. We've been sold this idea that buying a cheaper car is automatically the smart financial move, and mathematically, on paper, in a spreadsheet, it makes perfect sense, right? A $30,000 car costs less than a $50,000 car. Groundbreaking analysis. But here's what most people don't realize. The sticker price is maybe, and I'm being generous here, maybe 40% of the actual cost of owning that vehicle, and I'm not even talking about gas and insurance yet. I'm talking about something way more insidious that nobody warned you about. Let me paint you a picture. You walk onto a dealership lot. You've done your research. You know the Toyota Camry gets great reliability ratings. Consumer Reports loves it. Your neighbors had one for 8 years with zero problems. The monthly payment fits your budget. You're being responsible. You're being smart. Fast forward 12 months. You're spending $80 every other week getting it detailed because the interior already looks worn. You've already replaced the floor mats because the stock ones were garbage. You just spent $400 on window tinting because driving without it was unbearable. You financed $1,200 worth of better speakers because the stock audio system sounded like it was underwater. And you're thinking about wheels because, well, the stock ones are they're fine, but they're not great. Now, you might be thinking, Rehan, those are all optional. Nobody forced me to do those things. And you're right, nobody did. But here's where it gets really interesting. There's this concept in behavioral economics called adaptation level theory. Basically, humans are really, really good at adapting to their circumstances. When you first get that Camry, you're thrilled. It's new, it's yours, it's reliable. But your brain doesn't stay thrilled. Your brain adapts, and about 6 to 8 months in, something shifts. You start noticing things. The seats aren't quite as comfortable as you thought. The road noise is louder than you remembered. Your coworker's Audi is whisper quiet, and yours sounds like you're driving a tin can on the highway. And suddenly, good enough doesn't feel good enough anymore. A 2023 study from the Journal of Consumer Psychology found that 68% of people who bought cars in their budget-conscious category reported feeling some level of buyer's remorse within the first year, compared to only 23% of people who bought cars in their aspirational category. Think about that. The people who spent more money were 3 times less likely to regret their purchase. Why? Because they didn't have this gap, this psychological gap between what they have and what they wish they had. Let me show you the math on this, because this is where it gets absolutely wild. You buy a $28,000 Honda Civic instead of a $45,000 Audi A4. You just saved $17,000, right? You're a genius. You're going to invest that difference and retire early. Except here's what actually happens. Month 3, you spend $800 on ceramic coating because the paint is already showing swirl marks and you want to protect your investment. Month 5, you drop $1,500 on a premium sound system upgrade because listening to podcasts through those factory speakers is torture. Month 7, you finance $2,000 worth of wheels and tires because the stock ones look cheap and the ride quality is harsh. Month 9, you spend $600 on seat covers and interior upgrades because the cloth seats are already showing wear. Month 10, you get a $350 remote starter installed because you're tired of getting into a freezing car every morning. Month 12, you seriously consider trading it in for something nicer. Let me add that up for you. That's $5,250 in the first year alone, trying to make your cheap car feel less cheap. And that's being conservative. I've seen people spend double that. Now, here's the kicker. That Audi A4 you didn't buy, it came with the premium sound system. It came with heated seats. It came with the nicer wheels. It came with the features that made it feel premium from day one. You wouldn't have spent that extra $5,250 because you wouldn't have felt the need to. So your actual savings, not $17,000, your actual first year savings was $11,750. And we haven't even talked about your time, your mental energy, or the opportunity cost of all those weekends you spent researching mods and sitting in installation shops. But let's talk about something nobody mentions, your time. You bought the cheaper car to save money, right? To be financially responsible? But how many hours have you spent in the last year dealing with stuff you wouldn't have had to deal with if you'd bought the nicer car? Here's what I mean. You've spent hours researching how to make your car quieter, hours comparing aftermarket upgrades, hours driving to shops for installations, hours detailing it yourself because you can't justify paying someone else to do it, hours sitting in waiting rooms for warranty work because, yeah, reliable doesn't mean perfect. Let's say conservatively, you've spent 40 hours in the first year dealing with car-related stuff you wouldn't have had to deal with if you'd bought something nicer. If you value your time at even $30 an hour, which is low for most people watching this, that's $1,200 of time cost. Now we're at $13,000 in actual first-year savings. Still good, but nowhere near the $17,000 you thought you were saving. Everyone knows new cars depreciate. It's the first thing people tell you. Cars are terrible investments. They lose value the second you drive them off the lot. And it's true. But here's what most people don't realize. Cheap cars and expensive cars don't depreciate at the same rate, but they also don't depreciate in ways that matter equally to you. Let me explain. Your $28,000 Honda Civic will probably be worth about $20,000 after 3 years. You lost $8,000 in value. The $45,000 Audi A4 will probably be worth about $30,000 after 3 years. That's $15,000 in depreciation. Looks like you saved $7,000 by buying the Civic, right? Wrong. Because here's the thing, you're not selling either car after 3 years. You're probably keeping it for 8 to 10 years because you bought it to save money, remember? And over that timeline, the percentage depreciation evens out significantly. But more importantly, and this is crucial, you lived with the cheaper car for 8 years. You dealt with the road noise for 8 years. You settled for good enough for 8 years. You spent those 8 years wishing you had something nicer every single time you got in the car. The person who bought the Audi, they spent those 8 years enjoying their drive, not thinking about cars at all, just living their life. Now, look, I know what you're thinking. Rehan, you're just trying to justify buying expensive stuff. This is how people go broke. And I hear you, I really do. But here's what I'm actually saying. Buying cheap doesn't automatically mean saving money, and buying expensive doesn't automatically mean wasting money. There's this thing that happens, I see it all the time, where people convince themselves that the responsible choice is always the cheapest choice, and then they spend years making their cheap choice more expensive while telling themselves they're being smart. I call it the IKEA effect of cars. You know how you value that IKEA furniture more because you assembled it yourself? People do the same thing with cheap cars. They spend thousands trying to upgrade them, and they convince themselves it's smart because at least I didn't waste money on a luxury car. But you did waste money. You just wasted $200 at a time over 3 years instead of all at once, so it didn't feel as bad. Let me give you a real example with actual numbers because I think this will blow your mind.
Let's compare 2 real scenarios over 5 years. Scenario A, the smart choice. 2024 Honda Accord, $28,000. Financing at 6.5% for 60 months, $547 per month. Total paid, $32,820. Aftermarket upgrades year 1 to 2, $6,000. Additional maintenance, cheaper parts wear faster, $2,500. Extra detailing and care, $1,500. Time cost, valued at $30 an hour over 5 years, $4,500. Resale value after 5 years, $16,000. Total cost of ownership, $31,320. Scenario B, the expensive choice. 2024 Lexus ES350, $45,000. Financing at 5.9% for 60 months, $866 per month. Total paid, $51,960. Aftermarket upgrades, 0. Has everything. Additional maintenance, $500. Better quality, fewer issues. Extra detailing and care, $800. Better paint, easier to maintain. Time cost, $1,200. Less time needed. Resale value after 5 years, $28,000. Total cost of ownership, $25,460. Wait, did you catch that? The expensive car cost you less over 5 years than the cheap car. How is that possible? Because the cheap car made you spend money trying to make it less cheap. The expensive car just was nice from day one. You didn't feel the need to fix it or upgrade it or improve it. You just drove it. There's another cost nobody talks about: satisfaction. A 2022 study from Harvard Business School tracked car buyers over 3 years. They found that people who bought cars in their stretch category, meaning they spent a bit more than they initially planned but got something they really wanted, reported 43% higher satisfaction scores and 31% lower stress levels related to transportation. Think about that. The car you drive affects your stress levels, your daily mood, your self-image. And it's not shallow to care about that. You spend what, an hour a day in your car? 5 hours a week? 250 hours a year? That's 6 full weeks of your life every year spent in that vehicle. If you're miserable for those 6 weeks every single year because you bought the smart choice, what did you actually save? You'll justify spending $45 on a nice dinner without thinking twice. It's just one meal, I deserve it. But then you'll torture yourself over spending an extra $10,000 on a car you'll own for 8 years because that's so much money. Let's do the math. An extra $10,000 spread over 8 years of ownership is $1,250 a year. That's $104 a month. That's $3.42 a day. You know what costs $3.42? A medium latte. You're willing to spend more on coffee every single day than you're willing to spend to enjoy the vehicle you sit in an hour every day. Does that make sense? And then there's the comparison game. Oh man, this one kills people. You bought the Civic. Your neighbor bought a Tesla. Every time you see that Tesla in the driveway, you feel a little pang. Not because you're jealous, okay, maybe a little jealous, but because you're questioning your decision. Maybe I should have stretched a bit more. Maybe I was too conservative. Maybe I'm not living as well as I could be. And that mental energy you're spending on comparison, that's a cost too. It's a tax on your happiness, and it compounds daily. The person who bought what they actually wanted, they're not comparing, they're not questioning, they're just living their life. When you buy a car, you're usually thinking about your current financial situation. Can I afford this payment right now? But here's the thing. If you're making good career moves, investing in yourself, learning new skills, doing all the things you should be doing, your income should be growing. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average person sees about a 3% annual salary increase, and people who are actively developing their careers see closer to 5 to 8% annual increases. So let's say you make $75,000 a year when you buy that Civic. That $547 monthly payment feels like a lot. It's about 8.7% of your gross monthly income. But if you're growing your career, in 3 years you might be making $90,000. Now that same payment is only 7.3% of your income. In 5 years, at $100,000, it's down to 6.5%. Meanwhile, if you'd bought the Lexus at $866 a month, it would have been 13.8% of your income at first. Tight, but manageable. 3 years later, at $90,000, it's 11.4%. 5 years later, 10.4%. The point is, the payment that feels like a stretch today might feel perfectly reasonable in 2 years. But you'll be stuck with the cheaper car for 8 years, during most of which you could have actually afforded the nicer one. People will agonize over saving $5,000 on a car purchase, but they won't think twice about the opportunity cost of their dissatisfaction. What do I mean? When you're unhappy with your car, it affects your decisions. You might not take that road trip because you don't want to spend 8 hours in an uncomfortable car. You might not pursue that job opportunity 45 minutes away because the commute in your car sounds miserable. You might avoid offering to drive your friends because you're embarrassed by your vehicle. These are real costs. They're just invisible. I know someone who turned down a job that would have paid $15,000 more per year because it was a 40-minute commute, and they absolutely hated being in their car. They bought that car to save money, but it ended up costing them $15,000 a year in lost income. For 5 years before they finally quit and found something local, that decision cost them $75,000. Tell me again how buying the cheap car was the smart financial move. Let's talk about something dealerships don't want you to know. Cheaper cars aren't cheaper to maintain. I know, but Rehan, Hondas and Toyotas are super reliable, and they are, when they're new. But here's the thing about cheaper cars. They use cheaper parts. The interior materials wear faster, the paint is thinner, the sound deadening is minimal, the suspension components are less durable. A study by AAA in 2023 found that vehicles in the $25,000 to $35,000 range averaged $1,247 in annual maintenance and repair costs after year 3. Vehicles in the $45,000 to $60,000 luxury range, $987. The cheaper cars cost more to maintain. Why? Because luxury brands use better materials, better engineering. And yes, when something does break, the part might cost more, but things break less often. Plus, and this is huge, luxury brands often include free maintenance for the first few years. That Lexus I mentioned? 3 years of free oil changes, tire rotations, and scheduled maintenance. That Honda? You're paying for all of it starting from mile 1. Here's another thing people mess up. They'll compare the sticker prices but ignore the financing rates. Luxury brands often offer better financing because they're trying to move higher margin inventory. I've seen Lexus offering 2.9% APR while Honda was at 6.5% on the same day. On a $45,000 loan at 2.9% for 60 months, you're paying $4,050 in interest. On a $28,000 loan at 6.5%, you're paying $4,820 in interest. You financed less money and paid more in interest. This happens all the time and people don't even check because they're so focused on the sticker price. Okay, so what do you actually do with all this information? Because I'm not just here to rant about how everyone's thinking about car buying wrong. Let me give you a framework that actually works. Step 1. Calculate your true budget. Don't just look at the monthly payment you can afford. Look at the total cost of ownership. Insurance, maintenance, fuel, registration, and yes, those aftermarket modifications you're definitely going to make because you're going to feel like the car is lacking something. Add it all up. Be honest with yourself. If you think you can afford $500 a month for a car, but you're not accounting for the $200 a month you'll spend making the cheap car feel less cheap, your real budget is $700. Step 2, think in cost per happy hour. How many hours will you spend in this car? Over 8 years of ownership, assuming an hour a day, that's about 2,920 hours. If the nicer car costs $10,000 more, that's $3.42 per hour for significantly more satisfaction. Is your happiness worth $3.42 an hour? I'm guessing yes. Step 3, consider your income trajectory. Are you early in your career and expecting growth? Then the payment that feels tight today might feel easy in 2 years. Are you at peak earning years? Then maybe prioritize the lower payment since your income probably won't grow much. Step 4, be brutally honest about your personality. Some people genuinely don't care about cars. They just want reliable transportation and they'll be happy with a base model Civic forever. If that's you, awesome. Buy the cheap car and don't modify it.
But if you know, and be honest with yourself, if you know you're going to spend the next 3 years browsing forums about how to make your car better, just buy the better car. It'll cost you less in the end. Step 5. Run the real numbers. Make a spreadsheet. I know, spreadsheets are boring, but do it anyway. Put in the purchase price, the interest rate, the expected maintenance costs, the modifications you'll definitely make, the time cost of dealing with issues, everything. Compare the total cost over your expected ownership period, not just the sticker price. You'll be shocked how often the expensive car is actually cheaper when you account for everything.
Now look, I can hear some of you saying, Rehan, this is how people justify buying cars they can't afford and going broke. And you're right to be cautious. There's a big difference between buying a car that's slightly more than you planned but still within your means and buying a car you genuinely cannot afford. If you're going into debt to buy a car, if you're not saving for retirement, if you don't have an emergency fund, then no, you should not be buying a luxury vehicle. The advice in this video is for people who can afford either option but are choosing the cheaper one purely because they think it's the smart choice. There's nothing smart about saving $10,000 on a purchase and then spending $12,000 trying to make yourself feel better about it. This isn't really about cars. Cars are just an example. This same principle applies to furniture, clothes, tools, appliances, basically anything you're going to use regularly and keep for years. We've been conditioned to think that frugal always means cheap, that being financially responsible means always choosing the least expensive option, and that's just not true. Being financially responsible means understanding the true cost of your decisions, including the invisible costs, the time costs, the satisfaction costs, the opportunity costs. Sometimes the financially responsible choice is spending more money up front to avoid spending even more money over time trying to fix your mistake. So here's my challenge to you. The next time you're making a purchase, especially a big one that you'll have to live with for years, don't just look at the price tag. Don't just compare the monthly payments. Ask yourself, what's the total cost of ownership? What's the satisfaction factor? What's the cost of my time? What's the opportunity cost? What invisible expenses am I not accounting for? Because here's what I've learned after thinking about this stuff way too much. The expensive option is often the one that feels cheap after you've had it for 12 months, and the cheap option, that's the one that starts feeling expensive real quick. You deserve to make decisions that actually serve your financial goals, not decisions that just look good on a spreadsheet but make your life worse in practice. If this video helped you think differently about value versus cost, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment and tell me about a time you bought the cheap option and ended up spending more trying to fix it. And if you know someone who's about to buy a car purely because it's the cheapest option, send them this video. You might save them thousands of dollars and years of regret. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.